The EU's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas says the EU diplomats have not been able to agree on a new round of sanctions against Russia. At a meeting in Brussels today, Hungary and Slovakia vetoed the sanctions, as well as a new loan for Kyiv. Hungary says it will block the measures until Ukraine reopens a pipeline that transports Russian oil through its territory. Kyiv says a Russian strike damaged the pipeline in January. The sanctions package would be the 20th that the EU has placed on Russia since it invaded Ukraine 4 years ago. But investigations into downed Russian cruise missiles and drones show that many still contain European-made components. DW's Max Sander reports.
When Russia strikes Ukrainian cities, it uses swarms of drones to overwhelm air defenses and long-range missiles that are hard to intercept. They are assembled in Russia, but built with components from around the world, including Europe. Last summer, one of those Russian rockets tore through the building in Kyiv where Daria Arabinchuk's grandfather lived.
Yes, he lived on the 4th floor. That's the yellow balcony, all that's left of it. That was his apartment. Part of it, the kitchen and the bathroom, simply no longer exists.
That night, Daria was in her apartment with her child when a Russian drone impacted close by.
I immediately covered my daughter with a blanket. She was sleeping next to me. I covered her and thought, if shrapnel starts flying, at least I'll shield her. Then we quickly got dressed and went down to the air raid shelter.
Both strikes were part of a large-scale attack that night. Ukrainian authorities say Russia launched 470 missiles and drones. When Daria left the shelter, she learned that her grandfather was stuck beneath rubble. His house had been hit by a Russian Kh-101 cruise missile. These and other types of missiles and drones are built with Western components that sanctions were meant to keep out of Russia.
We've already identified some of the Western parts produced no later than middle of 2025. Which means that the supply chain still works.
These are some of the parts he's talking about. We've been asked not to reveal the location or the identity of our interview partner.
Ha-101 cruise missiles, cruise missile from the Iskander-K system, Ha-47 Kinjal missile, Garan-2 drone, and the RM-48U.
The Iskander ballistic missile has components from 2 German companies, connectors and chips from Harting and Infineon Technologies. Some of the components were produced last year, clearly not old stock.
This circuit board is used in the missile's guidance system.
Ukrainian authorities say that in some cases they have recovered more than 100 foreign parts from intercepted missiles, mainly from the US, China, and Taiwan. In the case of European producers, most chips found in Russian missiles and drones came from the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Germany, despite an embargo. According to the Sanctions Commissioner, microchips are exported legally to countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, or China, and then re-exported.
The last 3 years, we've been monitoring the export flows of selected goods from EU to third countries, usually the neighbors of the Russian Federation. And everybody can see some patterns in those volumes of exports. We don't think that the internal market of, say, Kyrgyzstan expanded 6 times. Probably not.
One of Europe's largest chip makers, Infineon Technologies, says that all its sales were in compliance with sanctions. In addition to implementing a no Russia clause in our distribution agreements, every delivery note explicitly states that onward shipment to Russia and Belarus is prohibited. The company says it does what it can to track where their components end up, but that with an annual production of 30 billion chips, it's difficult. Harting Technologies stressed that its products are for civilian use and don't have a specific military application. These Ethernet cable connections can be found as components in PCs just as well as in control cabinets or building automation systems. Vasilyuk says the companies haven't been doing enough to stop their products from entering Russia. He wants the EU to implement tougher sanctions and to enforce additional embargoes to stop Russia from getting around the existing restrictions through third countries.
That might, of course, have some collateral damage, but weighting this against the potential consequences, so Russia cannot acquire those parts through these countries.
With each new round of sanctions, new ways to circumvent them may emerge, especially when only around 60 countries enforce them. For Daria, the issue is personal. She says companies must take responsibility for their components.
They must not be sold. You must not do that. It's a business, but a business that kills people.
Then she shows us the last photo of her grandfather. He died weeks after the attack.
We now have the opportunity to speak to one of the journalists who broke that story. Lars Bové is an investigative reporter at the Belgian newspaper De Tijd. Lars, welcome to DW. Now, how big a factor is Western technology in Russia's war machine?
Well, maybe we should look at the specific attack drone, kamikaze drone that we have investigated. And this is the Geran 2, which is produced massively in Russia. And it hits like almost every day in Ukraine, when you have like 54,000 drones that have hit Ukraine last year. You see that 6 out of 10 of these drones were with this Geran 2 drone. So when we look inside the drone, components from recovered drones, then we see that up to 294 components are Western made. When you look at the Russian parts, they are simply like a battery or something more not that really simple component, sorry. But when you look at the Western parts, then we are talking about high tech. We are looking at microchips, diodes, transistors, antennas, etc. So without these Western components, it would really not be possible for Russia to produce these types of drones on such a massive scale. And indeed, the components that we looked at, they are not from old stocks. They are clearly made from 2023, 24, and even of last year, we heard.
That's striking. But if you follow the trade chain of these components, neither European companies nor other countries appear to be breaking any rules. So how then do these components end up in Russia and in Russia's war chest?
Yes, we have linked the components in this specific drones, for example, to 19 companies in more than 8 European countries. And all of these companies tell us that they do not want their components ending up in Russia and that they do not deliver them to Russia. But what did we see is that still their trademarks are entering Russia. And we looked at where are they coming from, who is exporting them to Russia. And then we mainly see companies, intermediaries in China, also in Hong Kong, and a few of them also in Turkey or the United Arab Emirates. And what is striking, they are delivering these components to Russian companies that are on sanctions lists. But when we look at these exporters, for example, in China, we do not see most of them on sanctions lists. So this might be already one of the solutions to put even more of these Chinese, Hong Kong, etc. companies that are delivering these high-tech components to Russia, to put them on sanctions lists also.
Is that the only thing the EU could do to prevent this from happening in the future?
Well, I do agree with the companies involved that it's very difficult to control and screen the full life cycle of such a component when you are talking about a very tiny microchip. And of course, we also see that even from the start of the invasion, EU sanctions were very tightened. You now even have companies have to include a no Russia clause when for certain export contracts. So a lot has been done, but we do see that even a company in Turkey, for example, sanctioned by the EU, can still deliver these European components to another company in Russia that's also sanctioned by the EU. And indeed, there are other ways also to deliver them, not as separate components, for example, but as already assembled products coming from China, for example, to Russia. But I do agree also with the Ukrainian authorities that maybe the European police services could also do more to investigate these traffics to Russia.
Mm-hmm. Excellent reporting. That was journalist Lars Bové. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Nice to be here.
And we can now speak to Benjamin Hilgenstock. He's a senior economist at the Kyiv School of Economics. Great to have you back on the show. Now, we're talking on the eve of the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. How big a blow is this for Ukraine?
Hello, good evening. Good to be back. Well, to be honest, it's not great. It's always good on a day like this, the 4th anniversary of the full-scale invasion, to send a powerful signal to Vladimir Putin, to Russia. On the other hand, we shouldn't overestimate the importance of the exact timeline. I think it is much more important what is ultimately going to be in the 20th sanctions package than whether it is adopted tonight, tomorrow, or in the coming day.
Mm-hmm. Now, Hungary and Slovakia, the two vetoing nations, they're tying their consent to oil deliveries, which they accuse the Ukrainians of deliberately preventing. Are these two EU members blackmailing the Ukrainians now?
In a way, yes, but this is also not new. Hungary has been playing both sides since the very beginning of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Certainly, Viktor Orban has some sympathies for Vladimir Putin. He also uses this as a political wedge issue domestically. He also uses this issue to get back at the EU for freezing a large amount of structural funds that were going to keep his regime going. So this is not new. In this case, it appears that he may be increasingly nervous about the upcoming election. And so again, he uses this as a political issue. Domestically, to a certain extent, it's also the case for Fico, but not to the same degree as with Orban.
Mm. So we're seeing a deadlock here for the time being, a deadlock as well on frozen Russian assets. In your opinion, has the EU maneuvered itself into a corner when it comes to Ukraine aid?
No, I really don't think so. This is not the first time that we've seen these last-minute interferences from certain countries. It went down to the wire as well in December when the EU originally adopted the Ukraine support loan, which is the mechanism that Hungary and Slovakia are currently holding up. In my view, there is really no alternative to this, and European leaders will have to find a way to get this through. It is too critical for Ukraine's ability to continue to fight, and in the same way, the 20th sanctions package is very important to keep pressure on Russia at this critical juncture.
What concessions do you think the EU is going to have to make to get this package over the line?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I mean, we've seen instances before when certain structural funds were ultimately released or where certain things were eliminated from the proposed sanctions packages. Something like this could happen again, or some reassurances from the EU in terms of the reopening of the Druzhba pipeline, something of this sort.
The senior economist Benjamin Hilgenstock, thank you for your time and your insights. Always great to speak to you.
Great. My pleasure. Thank you.
We can get the very latest from DW correspondent Teri Schultz, who's at the Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels for us. Teri, first of all, how big of a setback is it that the foreign ministers could not agree on the next set of sanctions on Moscow?
It is really a lot of bad news, both for the European Union in terms of its unity and for Ukraine, of course, Anya. Now, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas was just speaking about it. She said she was very disappointed, saying this is not at all the signal the European Union should be sending at any time, but especially not on this eve of the 4th anniversary of Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Not to mention the fact that European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen and Council President Antonio Costa will actually be in Kyiv in person tomorrow and having to look into the faces of Ukrainians and admit that the EU simply couldn't come to agreement on this last round of sanctions. And in addition, now a 90 billion euro loan, as you mentioned, that was agreed in December is now off the table again, according to Hungary and Slovakia. So this is very, very bad news, both for the EU and for Ukraine, Anya.
The timing does seem particularly bad. Just give us a bit of the backstory about why Hungary and Slovakia are blocking both the aid and this new round of sanctions.
Well, this is just the latest reason why these countries come up with excuses for not to support Ukraine. There have been other reasons in the past. This latest incident, they say, is because Russian oil is no longer flowing through Ukraine to Hungary and Slovakia. This is one of their chief forms of fuel. And Ukraine says that this pipeline was damaged by Russian strikes and that it is repairing the pipeline and that the flow will be restored at some point, but that they have to work on replacing their own infrastructure that, as we know, is bombed nightly by the Russians. Now, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas just said she understands Ukraine's priorities. It has to save its own people before it restores these Russian oil flows. At the same time, you heard Hungary and Slovakia taking a very strict line on this, blocking, as I said, this loan that was already agreed. And now we've just heard that Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico, as he has threatened, is coming out and saying that they will also stop emergency electricity supplies to Ukraine. This is one of the measures that Ukraine has undertaken in an effort to keep its people unfrozen in this winter. And now even that may be cut off. Going to be a very hard day in Kyiv tomorrow for von der Leyen and Costa.
And looking ahead, the EU, the UN, other international institutions have released their latest estimation for how much reconstruction of Ukraine is going to cost. It's nearly $600 billion. How much responsibility does the EU feel for helping Ukraine get back on its feet again once the war is over?
Well, the European Union, as many others, point out that the first responsibility to rebuild Ukraine, of course, should lie with the country that destroyed it, with Russia. And, of course, the EU did try to make Russia pay for this through this convoluted process of using Russian frozen assets in a loan to Ukraine. That was blocked, that time by Belgium. So that didn't work. And that's how this 90 billion euro loan came about as Plan B. So now Kaja Kallas even says maybe we'll go back to Plan A. The European Union does have a very sincere interest in helping Ukraine rebuild. Ukraine is a candidate country for membership in the European Union. So the EU always says it will stand by Ukraine. At the same time, it's obvious the EU is having trouble coming up with these funds, the solidarity with Ukraine inside EU member states. So this is going to be a tough road ahead, and we'll just have to see how they navigate it, Anya.
Teri Schultz in Brussels. Teri, thank you so much.